Okay, then now we are live on YouTube, and it's exactly 9 a.m. here. It should be 8 a.m. for Loreta, and this should be 6 p.m. for you, right?
5 p.m.
5 p.m. Okay, 5 p.m. For your end. And I'm so glad to welcome you here for this session. This is the closing session of our semester for Academic Integrity Policies PhD course. So in this closing session, I am very happy to welcome you as two distinguished guests here, joining from two different countries. If you don't mind, I'm going to open my presentation and share it here, so that I can introduce you better to the audience. Just a second, please. I hope you can see my presentation. Okay. Today, in this closing session, we plan to talk about pedagogical implications and suggestions for further research. Throughout the semester, we already talk about some essential theories, pedagogical theories, relating to academic integrity and how we can provide pedagogical purposes for our teachers and learners in order to act with integrity. And specifically in this session, we'd like to benefit from your expertise. And you are joining us from Australia. And in this course, almost every week, we refer to Australia because Australia is known as one of the leaders of academic integrity. I mean, you are providing really good models for us. So we believe you have a lot to share with us. And also, Loreta, you have quite good experience both in your country, Lithuania, and also your own expertise, not only as an academic working for Hanken School of Economics, but also relating to your experience as the editor for Journal of Academic Ethics. So we believe we can combine your expertise here to have a further understanding of pedagogical implications, and also we can suggest new topics to our students as future researchers here. Today, within this perspective, I'd like to first of all introduce our honorary guest to you. So I'm going to briefly introduce Professor Dr. Anne Rogerson and Dr. Loreta Tauginiene, and then we will move to our session. Here first, I'll be starting with Professor Rogerson. Indeed, this is a very nice title, Professor Rogerson, and we'd like to congratulate you for obtaining this title from your university. I know it very well. It is quite difficult to get a professor title from your university. I remember it from Tracy. So congratulations. You really deserve this title very much. As you can read from this presentation, Anne's expertise is related to management, leadership, and organizational communication. And when it comes to her research expertise, this time we see that she's dealing with understanding and detecting the patterns of cheating behaviors in student submission, and promoting academic integrity to staff, students, and the community. Specifically, we refer to use of paraphrasing tools in this course several times. And when we talk about research relating to paraphrasing tools, indeed, Here we have the pioneer Professor Anne Hirsch. She's working for the University of Wollongong in Australia. We had the first session with Zinat. Zinat also is working for the University of Wollongong in Dubai. This time for the closing session, we have Anne from the University of Wollongong in Australia. She is working for School of Business and also School of Education there. Considering her relevant positions, as you can read from this slide, she is involved in several positions. She is chairing Academic Integrity Advisory Group at her university, and also she is chairing Asia Pacific Forum for Educational Integrity. She is the editorial board member of International Journal for Educational Integrity. By the way, it was 2 weeks ago, I believe, we welcomed Sarah here as the editor of International Journal for Educational Integrity. She is also involved in the editorial board of the International Center for Academic Integrity. She's reviewing quite a lot for international journals. And more importantly, maybe she's the author of Breaches Unit in the Epigium Academic Integrity Program. As you already know, Epigium is a brand of Oxford University Press, specifically dealing with academic integrity for the promotion of academic integrity. And also, she's a member of the International Scientific Panel for the European Network for Academic Integrity and the Executive Advisory Board member for the United Arab Emirates Center for Academic Integrity, which Zinat is leading. Indeed, I'm not going to read the summary of her experience here, but I'd like to highlight one point from here, and maybe during your presentation, I'm sure you are going to relate your previous career with your recent position. We know that she started her career in the aviation management and human resources, and then later in 2008, she joined the University of Wollongong. So it is quite interesting that you had some different position previously, but I am sure you got some experience as working as aviation in aviation management industry. Here you see some of her key relevant publications. Indeed, it seems that we will be reading at least 3 different publications in 2022 by Rogerson. Either she wrote herself or co-authored. And we are looking forward to reading her publications. And this is a lovely photo from Vilnius, where we had the IE conference in 2019. Indeed, since then, we were unable to meet in person. Unfortunately, in 2020, we had to organize the conference as a virtual conference in 2020. Now I'm moving to Dr. Loreta Tauginiene. And Loreta, I'm sorry, probably I will be mispronouncing your surname. Today I realized that it's the first time, although I have known you for about 7 or 6 years. It is the first time today I am trying to pronounce your surname. So I'm so sorry for my mistake. Loreta is joining us from Hanken School of Economics in Finland, although she is living in Lithuania. And she has also interdisciplinary educational background. Indeed, she worked previously as a French teacher And since we have PhD students here enrolled in this course who are working as English as a foreign language teachers, either at universities or K-12 schools, we believe Loreta's previous experience in teaching French also will contribute us here today. She's a social scientist at Hanken School of Economics, and she's exploring research integrity, university social responsibility, ethical issues in citizen science. Here is the link for her relevant achievements. After the presentation, I'm going to, in chat box, share the links, share these relevant links, both for YouTube audience and here in Zoom meeting as well. Here you see Loreta's relevant publications. Indeed, I'm quite happy to co-author her entitled for the publication entitled Enhancing the Taxonomies Relating to Academic Integrity and Misconduct. At that time, we were working together for the European Network for Academic Integrity Erasmus Plus project, and we publish some findings there. And I'm quite happy to be her co-author there. And here you see a photo. Sorry for the image. I could find it from the internet. I couldn't find the original photo. This is the first INAI board, and I'm quite happy to be involved in this first board together with Thomas, Irene, Julius, and Loreta. So we were involved in the first founder board of INAI together with Loreta, and she contributed to the INAI board for 3 years. Now, I'd like to also remind you that Loreta is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Academic Ethics, and I believe she will share some tips relating to publishing in reputable journals. So her suggestions will be very useful, specifically for early career researchers, and also for those who'd like to publish their research relating to academic integrity. And this is again another photo from 2019. It was a photo from Prague when we attended ETINET third plenary session, and that was the last time when I met with Loreta. Now, before I leave the word to our guest speakers, I'd like to remind you very few discussions from our earlier weeks. The first thing, so far we talked about several approaches and theories, but before I leave the word, I'd like to remind you something from Bertram Gallant. Academic integrity is positive. Indeed, when we welcomed Thomas Lancaster here, he indicated that still there are more sources in the relevant literature dealing with negativeness relating to academic integrity. I mean, approaching the issue from a negative perspective. But it is quite important for us to understand that academic integrity is positive, and we are trying to promote something positive. Therefore, academic integrity must be predicated on attention to institutional integrity. If institutional leaders and authoritative figures fail to model and uphold integrity, then it will always be difficult to ask students to do so. Suppose I am a lecturer, I am plagiarizing, or I have been involved in other types of academic misconduct. However, I am running an academic integrity policies PhD course, and I am asking my students to act with integrity. It wouldn't work, and it doesn't make any sense. So when we are talking about academic integrity, we always say this here throughout the semester. We need to take every stakeholder's responsibility into consideration. This is we are giving importance of ethical infrastructures here in our policies. And another thing, the second thing is related to curriculum development. Since we are talking about pedagogy here, curriculum, syllabus, these are very important for us. And here, Bertram Gallen says, pedagogical methods, curriculum and assessments must be designed to facilitate and measure learning, not to stop cheating, make teaching more efficient, or increase student enrollment. So it should be our priority to stop cheating. We are teaching, and we are checking whether, as teachers, we are meeting our outputs, teaching outputs by the help of these assessments. This is a very important point. Especially, we realize the importance of the interaction between assessment and teaching during COVID because of some ill practices relating to assessment. Therefore, it is quite important for faculty of educations, I mean, training teachers, institutions training teachers, to take this into consideration. And also, it is important for Ministry of Education or for the other bodies, governmental bodies, to provide training, academic integrity training to in-service teachers. Now, I'd like to stop here, and I would like to give the floor to our guests. I stop my presentation here, and
yes,
I believe if you'd like to share anything, I believe you can do this right now.
Okay.
Thank you once again for agreeing to join us here. I know you don't feel very well after COVID. But you are still here with us. This is very much appreciated. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I'm just looking at the sharing options. I'm trying to do a screen share.
On my laptop, it's at the bottom in the middle of.
Yes, it's coming up with one participant can share at a time. So it's got that setting. I'm just going to, you can share. Okay, it's got sharing options, but it's not letting me share from my screen. I've gone down to share screen.
If you like, you can send your presentation to me, and then I can share it here for you.
Okay, then.
If it
so what I will do, I will just send this presentation to Salim, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of the streaming. It's not wishing to share. Just sending that through. And so while that is just going through to Salim, I'll just mention a couple of things with my background. Salim mentioned my background in aviation before I became an academic. The airline I used to work for no longer exists. It collapsed a number of years ago, but it gave some very good training in relation to managing people. And one of those issues I had to deal with was where employees do not do what they're supposed to do. And so I would have to have some very difficult conversations with employees about work performance. And what that did was gave me a great background for having conversations with students about not doing the right thing. So when I joined my university and they were looking for someone to actually manage academic misconduct cases, I was happy to actually step in and do that particular role. And it was through that I actually got into academic integrity research, because I became very, very interested about what I was seeing, but also about the individual behaviours of people who either cheated or didn't understand what cheating was. So sometimes you don't know where your prior experience will lead you to. And in this particular case, it led me to a whole body of research. And I'm very pleased to say that it is through the academic integrity research that I was able to be promoted to professor. So I think that is very good for the field. And it's also the case with Kath Ellis at University of New South Wales. She too has recently been promoted to full professor on the back of her academic integrity research. So I think it's wonderful for a group of students who are interested in this particular area to say that there is growing recognition and credibility in academic integrity research and what it means for academia, research and educational institutions in a more broad sense. Has that presentation made it through, Salim?
Yes, it's ready here. And once you're ready, I can share it.
You can share it now if you would like, please. Great, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So as Salim mentioned, I'm at the University of Wollongong in Australia, which is the base. Dubai, our campus in Dubai is a satellite campus. We also have a campus in Malaysia. Wollongong, people sort of go, where is Wollongong? Wollongong is about 90 minutes south of Sydney, or the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House. So if I left my place now, I could be at Sydney Harbour and the Opera House in about an hour and a half. So we're very closely associated with Sydney, and we're also in a beautiful area of the south coast of New South Wales. I live in a very lovely area. And we're back onto forests and bush and things. So I'm very, very privileged. And yes, we have lovely native animals near us and kangaroos and things. So not in my backyard, but very, very close by. So I think, yes, please. So what I'm going to start with is, as noted in the pre-information, I have degrees like Loreta. I have degrees in education as well as in business, and it's really interesting to bring those two fields together. And when you put the academic integrity filter on it, I adopt the approach by Tricia Bertram-Gallant is I'm not trying to design something so it can't be cheated. I take it from a pedagogical perspective that I'm designing it. But if I can include things that will make that assessment task more rigorous, that's a great outcome. So we're trying to meet a number of needs at the same time. So if you could move on, please, Salim. Okay. There is a relationship between policies, processes and curricula and learning design. We are trying to guarantee to people that they are meeting learning outcomes. So what we are doing is facilitating that, Whereas the policies, processes, and government things like curricula in particular fields also put some criteria on that, and it's bringing these things together. But it also then has that academic integrity filter on top. You can go forward. So the thing about this, and what I talk to the academics at my institution, is learning and assessment design are the only area where we actually have control over. We cannot, I cannot control you as students. I cannot control your motivation. I can make education engaging. I can make assessment design interesting. But the design I put into assessment and the design I put into learning and coursework is the only thing where I actually have control. And I can't influence, I can educate, but I cannot influence whether a student decides to or is influenced by cheating or adopting cheating behaviours. Because there are so many influences on their lives, prior experiences, social media, their friends, relationships, I can't control those aspects. So learning and assessment design is an area where I do have control. And so I need to influence that in the best way I possibly can. Move on, thanks. So, and elements. So if you can flick over to the next one, please. So what do we want students to do? We have to be clear in terms of instruction. So I try and design assessment and learning from thinking about what my students can and cannot do. What am I expecting them to be able to do, or what do I anticipate they can do when they get into my class? And what do they need to be able to do when they leave? It might be a prerequisite for another subject, further study. I look for patterns, and you'll see that in titles of some of my papers I published. I look at organisational behaviour. I am interested in patterns of behaviour, because then there is a thing in organisational behaviour that says past performance predicts future behaviour. So I'm trying to understand the patterns, but I'm also trying to interpret the patterns to determine either to make sense of what is happening, but also to help with designing things in the future. So when I look at those patterns, I also determine what the difficulties with assessment responses. And I also indicate to academics, it's not about what I did when I did that subject myself in an undergraduate degree or a postgraduate degree. I have to look at it in the context of now. So someone might have studied something, and I've got some older academics in my faculty who might have studied before social media was there, but their frame of reference is still when they did their study. So they might think, oh, well, I didn't look at that, so a student won't look at that. The fact is there are so many influences on our students now that we don't have control over that change the way they interpret study. So for example, I provide exemplars to students. I annotate the exemplars, so I make it very difficult for them to copy it. They also, it has disclaimers on it so that they can't upload it to a file sharing site because it's too difficult to wipe all my watermarks and comments and things off it. But I highlight things with those exemplars to say, you know, here's one example of an introduction. Here is another example of an introduction. I explain features and it's all annotated with comments. Because I know when I give an assessment task to a student, one question they will ask is, what does this look like? And if I don't provide them the example to say, this is what is expected and this is what it means, they will go searching on the internet. And the moment they go searching on the internet, that will lead them to the site selling assignments, the site sharing assignments, people trying to do the wrong thing. So I want them to get the right information from me to save them looking. So that's an example of thinking about, well, what are my students going to need for this particular topic? Can I have the next slide, please? So if you inherit, and as academics, we quite often inherit subjects from other people, someone else who's taught it before, and they say, here's the material that was related to that subject before, or here's a new subject, and you might think, how do I go about this? Careful assessment design can actually make our work easier, and that's easier from a grading perspective, from an evaluation perspective. Changing an assessment task doesn't mean about making an assessment from 3,000 words to 5,000 words, because that will make it tougher. It is about being more creative with the assessment design, which can have a number of different benefits. Learn from your experiences. So if you change something with an assessment task and it doesn't work, or you might find that some level of cheating might be exploited, you have the power to change that in the future. So we can learn from our experiences. The biggest thing I learned through my Master of Education degree was to experiment, is to try something else. Something's not working, so try something different. And the thing that's amazing with students is we quite often underestimate what they can actually do. And I have pushed the boundaries and been amazed and surprised what students can achieve. The students have gotten more out of the assessment task. I have found it easier to grade. And in cases where students are cheating, it is actually more obvious. So it has mutual benefits. Next slide, please. So it's not about just about the assessment design, it is about what question we're asking them to answer. And this relates not only to assessment questions, so a part of a coursework, but it can also relate to examinations. A well-framed question can make cheating or attempts to cheat more obvious. It won't eliminate it, but it will make it obvious. And this is where we're trying to make it obvious. And I have conversations with students in class to actually highlight this to them, to say, I research in academic integrity, I research student cheating. If you want to try and cheat in a class, mine's not really the one to do it, but someone will still try, guarantee it. But because I am very careful how I frame assessment questions and I include elements of recency and context, it makes those attempts to cheat more obvious. So the poorly framed question is as much of a problem as poor assessment design. Next slide, please. So I have had to address in my own faculty cases where someone says they're updating the question from year to year and they will just change the names or the values or the cases or the text and say, well, I've changed it. But if it takes a formulaic approach, it's very easy for someone to take someone else's prior work and change those particular aspects to meet the revised criteria. Students share material. They are encouraged, so there is a lot of work in the area of file sharing. There are sites, just as there are sites selling materials, there are sites sharing materials. They operate through barter arrangement and a credit. So a student will take their assessment task, upload it to the internet, and then download something else in exchange. So if we're just changing small parts of an assessment question, it's going to be very easy for students to copy and alter. So, and this also goes with taking questions out of textbooks. As soon as the textbook is published, the instructor guide is available on the internet. So if you think I'll take a question out of an instructor guide and use that for my assessment, the answers or modelled answers will be in the instructor's guide. So we've got to go beyond that. Next slide, please. So Google your question. If you're thinking about writing a question, Google it, because the moment you've published a question to a student, they will be Googling it to see where it hits. And so it also feeds into online discussions. So we have a quality assurance process in our faculty where we have to run our questions or our proposed questions through another academic for them to cast another eye over it, to evaluate it. And I've returned ones for clarity where someone has written a question such as, please outline the theory of X and what the steps are in that particular theory. If you write a question about a theory, a site selling assignments can replicate that so easily it's not funny. But if you have a question that has context, for example, please outline the theory of X when you compare it to the recent events in either a government situation, a local political thing, a local economic thing, you're putting context on it. And the site selling assignments cannot replicate that. So it's not necessarily stopping the cheating, but it's making it very much more obvious. Next slide, please. So how do I choose to decide if it needs changing? Okay, next slide. Get direct feedback. So part of a teaching review, run a question past someone else. If you have subject and teacher evaluations, I get feedback from tutors. But I also pick a lot up from students when I'm having consultations with them. If they're asking me questions, it might mean that I haven't clarified the requirements, the supporting information. And the more questions students are asking me, I think that's a very good thing. Because if they're asking questions, they might be asking those questions on the internet, social media, Facebook. And unfortunately, the site selling materials will also be trying to monitor that traffic. So lots of direct feedback can help us inform. Next slide, please. And then there's indirect feedback, the questions you get asked in class. And also one of the papers I've put up there that's in the International Journal for Educational Integrity is if I see a pattern when I'm grading papers that's evident through a number of submissions, it might be that I haven't asked the question properly, I haven't given supporting information properly, or how I've actually designed the assessment. So I don't, and I've put a point there, these aren't the students' issue, but ours. So we can't just say, oh, well, I've done this and it hasn't been a problem in the past. We have to use that indirect feedback to help refine assessment design. A particular group of students may have a similar issue. So with COVID, there haven't been as many international students arriving in Australia. But I have taught a number of classes where I have had students from 17, 18 different countries. And sometimes a word doesn't translate, or sometimes someone's educational background hasn't. I've assumed someone knows something and they don't. So I don't necessarily point the finger at the students not doing something. It is, what can I do as an educator to make this clear for a student so that they will come to me and ask questions rather than asking questions off the internet or academics, one of their least favourite phrases is, my friend said. So someone will go and ask their friend what the answer is. Their friend isn't teaching the class. The friend isn't grading the paper. So we want them to come and ask us. Next slide, please. Okay, criteria. Having specific requirements makes it easier for the students to understand. And I call this sort of the mechanics. It's like the backbone of it. It's not the intellectual work, it's like the framework. So I will specify the number and type of references. I will give them a range, because then if students don't fall in that range, I start asking questions. We might give them examples. I give them parameters on how many quotes can be used. And this comes back from, I set an assignment once. One student wrote, it was a 1,500 word essay. They wrote a beautiful essay, all in text citations, beautifully referenced, but they had only written 150 words of the 1,500. The rest of it was all in quotes. So suddenly I had to, it wasn't the student's fault. They met the criteria I'd set. So then that was a lesson to me that I set a boundary for what's acceptable. So I say to students, your range is 10%, no more than 10% in direct quotes. So the students know what they've got to work to. But again, it gives me a measurement point as to what's normal. We have to understand, a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment is educating people as to what is normal from a disciplinary perspective. Because if we understand what's normal, then what's not normal is the stuff we need to start asking some academic integrity questions. If you clarify anything to a student, so you might have published a question and you've clarified everything, make sure you put those clarifications in writing, so that if you subsequently say to someone, well, I'm grading you down because of a certain feature, it's clear they're aware of what the changes were. Next slide, please. So, so this comes back to some of the point I was making before. Using recent news items which haven't hit the academic literature yet are a great way of providing context. It's very, very difficult for paid services, essay mills to meet those criteria. So it is not going to stop cheating, but it is going to make it more obvious. My point about exemplars is about providing them so students don't go searching. And the specific requirements also discourage students from contract cheating. So if we put some reasonable parameters around them, students, we have the evidence from the work from Tracy Brettag that students are less likely to contract cheat. So if we put the specific information in there. Next slide, please. For me, a lot of the work I've done, and one of the recent or one of the chapters that will be out in 2022 is this thing about references. For me, a reference list, bibliography list, is a litmus test as to the quality of someone's work and whether or not there are academic integrity issues associated with it. And this is stuff that I have observed over now 12, 13 years. And if you gave me a paper to grade, the very first thing I'm going to go and look at is the reference list. Because attention to detail is an indicator of quality. If someone has met the criteria in terms of the referencing format, it's in correct order related to the format. So if it was in Vancouver, it would be in numerical form. If it's in Harvard, it will be in alphabetical order. If it's in APA 7, it will have DOIs on it. Whether there is the correct breadth and depth of references that I have specified in the criteria. And again, depending on the discipline, philosophy, you might have some very old references. But in business disciplines, I can actually say I want references between no earlier than 2005, because I'm wanting to reflect a current business environment. So putting these parameters for students in the criteria of what they provide, again, gives you a measure as to whether people have met the criteria or not. And from there, I can actually get a very quick gauge as to whether I'm going to have issues with this assessment task or not. Now, Turnitin is starting to build some of this. They're doing some work in the background to try and build some of this in. The things that I do manually, they're trying to actually build in automatically to, say, for example, reconcile an in-text citation to the reference list. Because one of the marks is that people will put lots of references in a reference list, but not use them within text citations. So they're trying to cover up what they're doing. So reference lists are a big litmus test. Next slide, please. So here's a couple of cases where, and these were things I actually did as part of my master's program, where I took an original assessment design and I changed things. So this was a traditional, 10 years ago, this was a traditional assessment approach for a subject where there was an essay, a report, and an examination. Next slide, please. And so I took into consideration when I was evaluating, it was a compulsory subject. I'd inherited these assessment tasks, but the students, it wasn't a prescribed course of study. So I might get a student in this master's program taking this subject as their first subject, or it could even be their last. So I couldn't assume knowledge. The mention I have the AQF, it's the Australian Qualifications Framework. Our government authority specifies that at certain levels of study, we have to meet certain learning outcomes. So this change was brought in 2015, and we had to go through and re-examine all our subjects. I had identified students who were trying to cheat, purchase or borrow materials, and there were some reasonably high failure rates. Next slide, please. So this was a cross-cultural organisational behaviour class. I wanted to include real-world examples. And I picked up, this observation thing, generic answers that didn't answer the question were identified as coming from cheating sites. They're very, very generalised. They don't have that level of context. And we also had some international students with poorer levels of English. And because of the poorer level of English, and I teach obviously in an English-speaking university, they were having more difficulty telling what they had purchased was inappropriate. So they couldn't measure the quality of what they were actually buying. Next slide, please. I came up with some ideas, and this is where I've got help from a learning designer. I challenged myself to speak to someone else. So one of the things with teaching and learning is to speak to colleagues, to test an idea with someone else, to say, what do you think about? I am thinking about changing this. Have you got any ideas? Because it sparks conversations, and someone else might have tried what you're thinking about, or they might be able to put a different perspective on it. And it's those rich conversations that really make teaching and learning a joy, and also getting the most out of assessment tasks. So I was trying to address a number of issues. Yes, please, the next slide. So where this ended up, I looked at my learning outcomes, but I also wanted to develop some professional skills as well as academic skills for the students. But I also promote academic integrity because that's my thing. So what I did was actually establish cross-cultural groups. I forced people into groups. I didn't let them self-select. And part of that is how you communicate that to people. When we go into a workplace, we don't get to choose who we work with. We don't self-select. You will be put into a department, into a team. You'll be working with people you don't know. So I sold it or explained it to the students that I was going to allocate them to a team, and they were going, this is what happens in a workplace. So to use it as a learning experience in a safe environment. So the first assignment they had was a group assignment, but I flipped the classroom. They did the work in class, so I could monitor what they did. But I could also answer questions. So I could see who was struggling, who was working well. And then that assignment became the source of the second assignment, which was reflective. So it was very easy to tell who was not using the information. I gave them what's called a wicked problem. There was no one answer to the question. So it depended on how they integrated their information. They had to write abstracts, and they had to, as a team, combine their abstracts into a single piece of text. It was a short piece of text. Believe it or not, it's harder to write a short amount of words than it is to write a big one. The advantage of writing a short amount of words is there's less for us to grade, but you get a better idea of how someone can synthesize or bring together information. So the results were that people practiced skills they didn't realise they needed. They were translatable to workplaces, but the byproduct was the attempts to cheat were obvious. Now, I'm going to bring in the research side here. I ended up presenting this at a conference. I have subsequently got 2 publications out of this particular piece of work. One is in a book about cross-cultural communication, but I had the opportunity in that to promote academic integrity as well, because if I can send the message about the importance of academic integrity and how to integrate it, it's not difficult if you look at it in a constructive way. Here are opportunities to change assessment design for a purpose, but also get research out of it. So you're getting multiple value. Next slide, please. I still left in this particular subject a final examination, and I got them to reflect on what they'd learned out of the exercise. I actually learned more out of those examination answers than I had out of any other feedback. I trained the students or coached them through tutorial sessions on how to do reflective writing. But because it was in an examination and because the students knew other people wouldn't see it, they were actually very open with their responses. And one of the ones that really surprised me was a student from China said she learned not only was it okay to ask questions, she learned how to ask a question. And for me, that was amazing. I had told students, please ask me questions. What I didn't understand was that some students didn't know how to ask a question because their previous educational environment discouraged it. Next slide, please. I get very excited about this stuff. So again, this was another one I inherited. And again, it was essay, report, exam. And I'm going, boring, let's do something else. Next slide, please. This was a compulsory Master of Business Administration subject. And again, students didn't have to take the subject in order. So I taught the subject for a couple of years and identified some issues. So I decided to do something about it. Next slide, please. So I took a tool. So this is a different way of doing it. So I found an emotional intelligence exercise. I was teaching leadership in organisations. I took an emotional intelligence tool and got students, I explained about what psychometric tools were about and how we use them. But then I got them to reflect on the results. So it was about them. And at first I thought, students said, oh, this is really tough. And then they went, wow, this is exciting. And then I reduced their second, I got rid of the examination, because in real world business, your boss does not ask you to take an examination. So I thought it wasn't relevant. So I tried to make it relevant, whereas report writing is a business skill. So I changed it to make it relevant for the students. Next one, please. So the outcomes. I had personal learnings from this. Exams are not a solution to academic integrity issues. Now, I know that some, and with accountancy in Australia, the accountancy board specifies they must have exams so that we can tell the students done the work. But exams are not always the solution to academic integrity. And with the shift with COVID to online environments, I think that would be fairly clear. I found getting rid of exams liberating. I learned that short writing is more difficult than longer. So I changed things like a 3,000 word assignment into a problem solving exercise and define a problem in 500 words. 500 words is much easier to mark than 3,000, but it's also less intimidating to a student. I replaced one thing eventually with short videos, so they didn't even have to write. But it's the student outcomes are improved and the academic integrity issues are more obvious. And this is where it's designing it around the educational experience rather than trying to design out cheating. Next slide, please. Be open to new ideas, news items, Twitter feeds, YouTube. If you use exams, ensure questions and instructions are consistent and not confusing. Because the thing is, if we read things that we write, our brain actually skips over stuff, so it can miss key things. It's very important to consult and liaise with colleagues. Next, please. My overall learnings were use feedback and be open to new ideas and opportunities. If you have areas that you can consult colleagues, heads of school, heads of department, sometimes you can get learning support. You have learning designers in some institutions. Ask questions. Just as we want students to use resources, we have resources we need to use as well. Students can be challenged. Experiment within your guidelines. And what I found is my grading and assessment life actually became easier when I actually took some time around the design. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram out of a paper I wrote for the Journal of International Journal for Educational Integrity. And I look at integrating academic integrity into the subject learning cycle. So when I'm preparing stuff, I review assessments. I look at the criteria I'm specifying. And then when I'm grading, the identify indicators using technologies, things like Turnitin reports, the flags I'm going to get there. I identify if there are any referencing or citing irregularities. I review language for consistency, and did the answer or the submission meet the criteria? I compare irregularities across a cohort because sometimes the problems are mine and not students. I evaluate and I feed that into the next instance. So it's not just a set and forget, it's a continual cycle of improvement. And that incremental improvement will actually help not only with the learning that students have, but also to address academic integrity issues. Next slide, please. So integrating this into research opportunities, you can do pre and post testing. So you can understand what students' capabilities are beforehand and after. You can look at interventions, measuring interventions. So at our institution, we have a recording system for academic misconduct. But if you have been flagged, even with poor academic practice, we have an intervention module that students have to do. And this is another area I'm going into research. The big thing for me at the moment is transition points. I'm aware that parents will help their children in grade school and high school to get their assignments done. What that is doing is teaching students it's okay for someone else to do your work. And I think that is something we really need to examine, because the burden has fallen on higher education to address this as an issue, where some of the problem is related to behaviours that are embedded when children are much younger. Some of the other things we can look at is the difference between grades and levels of study, performance levels, but also between disciplines, different patterns of academic integrity issues between disciplines. Next slide, please. And I think that's the last one. There's also the book. There is a research agenda for academic integrity. It's a 2020 publication. I've got a chapter in there around paraphrasing tools and some of the things that people could look at. There are some great ideas in there, as well as the suggestions for future research in the articles in the Journal of Educational Integrity and in Loreta's journal, Journal of Academic Ethics. A good journal article will have suggestions for future research. So looking at the academic integrity, excuse me, literature will also indicate to you potential ideas for looking at the academic integrity space as a research opportunity. And there are plenty there that can be pursued. So that's the end of my presentation. I know what our time frame is. I don't know if you want to hold questions till the end and after Loreta's presented, Salim, but I'll pass back over to you.
Oh, thank you, and it was really amazing. I really loved your suggestions, and here I took a few notes. I am also paying attention, quite a lot of attention to referencing skills, because they are giving good insights to the lecturer about the quality of the paper, but sometimes they also help us identify especially contract cheating or collusion. I mean, once we question our students about in-text citations, suppose, for example, you realize that the student is citing several sources in parentheses, and then you question the student whether he or she really read them and what she synthesized, analyzed, and then wrote down. So when you question this, it is a really good opportunity for us indeed to reveal any possible academic misconduct. In addition, I remember a case, not from my own class, but from someone else, translation plagiarism case. And if we pay attention to the similarity reports from the reference list, of course, we are expecting similarities in the references. But if we realize that the color codes are almost the same, or to large extent they are the same color, it will be a good indicator to me. I mean, at least some good suspicion for me to think about translation plagiarism. So references, either in-text citations or reference entries, they are quite important. And also, I like the idea about asking questions, and it was quite useful. In this case, we need to, as teachers, question what we are questioning. If we are questioning declarative knowledge, probably we will be encouraging our students not to be original. I mean, if we are asking a question about the history of something, it means that there will be no originality in it. However, we need to encourage them in a way to use this information either for to turn it to procedural knowledge or to conditional knowledge, so then they can analyze it and then they can put some originality in it. And one final comment relating to short and long essays. Okay, from the student's perspective, it is a writing task, but from the teacher perspective, it is a reading task. So here it reminded me the difference between IELTS and TOEFL examinations. In TOEFL examination, for example, there are shorter passages. So it is in a way trying to avoid from content bias, ensuring content familiarity. Whereas there are longer texts in IELTS examination because they believe that certain abilities can be assessed by means of longer text. So it is a good opportunity for us as lecturers, as we see here, to combine short and write passages, encouraging our students to write both short and long passages so that they can practice these skills, and then as teachers we can also assess it from different perspectives. Thank you, and I really learned a lot, and I'm sure I'll be using quite a lot from this session in my own course. Now, before we leave it to Loreta, Loreta, if you don't mind, let me ask whether we have a question at this point from our students, and then but we plan to leave the question session to the end. But before we move to you, let me ask whether we have any specific question at this point. Yes, students, do you at this point have any question to Anne?
Yes, I have, if I may.
Yes, please. So we will have a very short question here, and then leave it to the end. Okay.
So yes, dear Anne, dear professor, when you experiment with your design, how many students were there in your class, and what is your suggestion for the number of students, and to what extent it was manageable?
Good question. I don't have control over how many students I get in the class. Ideally, I would like somewhere between 20 and 30 for a good interaction, and I'm talking postgraduate rather than big first-year subjects. But with one of those classes, the one with the reflective task, the emotional intelligence tool and the reflective task, I had 56 students, 56 postgraduates in a MBA class. And some of those students were actually being taught remotely. It was prior to COVID, but I had some engineering students who were based on mining sites. So they would video conference into the class. So it worked well. And that's one of the reasons why I could only get grading support if I had over 60 students. Otherwise, it was part of my workload. The one with the group assignment, I think I had 36 in one city, and in a Sydney campus, I had another 24. So they were in groups of 4. I tried to keep them in groups of 4. To get a good level, it was enough there for interaction, but it wasn't too big. I mean, if I talked about team theory and things, that ideally a good team is between 6 and 10 people. Trying to facilitate that in a teaching space is not easy. So groups of 4 was easy to work in the teaching space and the room that I had. So some of it is I don't have control over how many people come in. And we won't run a particular subject if there's less than 20, because it comes then back down to economic viability unless a program's being taught out. So that would be the parameter in the graduate space. Our undergraduate classes, so some of our first year subjects may have 500 or 700 students in them, but their I know, but they're tutorial groups. So they would have a big subject, but a tutorial group would have 24. So it's a smaller, so they have the big sort of general content, but the applied learning is in a smaller content. So our institutional parameters are usually between 20 and 30.
Okay, and thank you. And also, where can I find further information on your ways of how to facilitate their group work?
Okay, what I can do through Salim, I'll send to Salim for distribution to the class, the papers. So I can give you the paper that explains how to do it.
Yeah.
And then you can email me if you have other questions around that. I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to distribute it once I receive it from you. So let's stop the questions for now for Anne's presentation and move to Loreta to learn about her experience as an editor. Loreta, I'd like to welcome you once again. So good to see you here.
Good to see all of you here and at my early morning. I hope you see my slides.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, just move on this. Okay, so it's really nice to have an opportunity to introduce the Journal of Academic Ethics for your community. And to do so, I just give a snapshot on the GAT scope in general sense, a bit of history. And also I would give more detail about GAT policy, which is very important to read about and to learn when considering what kind of journal to submit the manuscript and what is going to be asked to report to the journal, and how it may also affect if something is missed to report. And then I will end up with expectations for future research. So let's start with this snapshot of the GAT scope and history. So to remind you that this is quite yet young journal, I would say. It's about 20 years ago that it was founded by two prominent researchers, Deborah Poff and Alex Mikalos. Before that, they founded another journal, which is now in these days is a big, influential, high-ranking journal. It's a Journal of Business Ethics. And when I had a question why there was a need to establish such a journal, so I got an answer that the fact is that Journal of Business Ethics is not able to accommodate all ethical aspects, specifically that what is happening in academia. And that was the idea how this journal was founded, and now we have it in these days. So the Deborah Poff, who was before me an editor-in-chief for a long time. So she was also a chair of the Committee on Publication Ethics, and definitely also she had many other roles in ethics. So she's really a prominent researcher in the field, and for me that was an honor to take over her as the founded journal. So the scope, that's why this is, as most of scientific journals, this is a peer-reviewed journal, and it focuses on multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary topics, so it does not cover one specific field, so it can host different submissions if it falls under the scope of the journal. The essential point here when mentioning and defining the scope is, first of all, that it focuses on all ethical issues, but only the ones that happen within academia, which is post-secondary level, university level, or higher education and research level. So we definitely cannot focus on we have to reject, to make a desk rejection if the paper is submitted about ethical issues in pre-university level, let's say in high school. So that's a pity because I found personally that these submissions are quite interesting and important to understand what happens afterwards in the university if we frame that some habits appear or start arising in the high school, and then the university just see what happened before that. But so far we do focus only on academia level, as I just defined, university, higher education, research, or post-secondary. So the journal itself, it publishes original research, and it may be in the field of research conduct and research publication. It may also target teaching and student relations, leadership, management, and governance. So we do definitely look at all aspects that can happen within these academic settings. And to be more specific, or to be more detailed about what kind of ethical aspects could be mentioned here. So definitely this is not an exhaustive list, but that's gives a bit of hint what it could be about and whether a specific topic could be relevant for the GAT. Some general information that might be very also useful for other young researchers and senior researchers. So before selecting this journal or considering whether to submit a manuscript for this journal, so it's indexed in Scopus and also an emerging sources citation index and some other international databases. Definitely what is important for each researcher, it depends on evaluation criteria that institution or the country has established by then. We do publish 4 issues per year, and lately we have increased the number of papers per issue. So now we can host 7, 8 papers per issues. Before that, it was much less, 5, 6 papers. And definitely that also shows us that the journal is growing and it takes an establishment position in the field. As I mentioned before that this journal invites interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary topics in the field. So that also shows that we are between different portals depending on the fields. So portal 1 is for philosophy, sociology, and political sciences. If we just look at the data provided by CIMA for 2020, then we are in the portal 2 in arts and humanities and education. So far I have no the latest statistic about this. And since we are in the emerging citation index, we have no yet impact factor, but so far we have some prediction to what it could be. But again, depending on the source, this index might vary. If we look at the geographical coverage, let's say from which countries we do receive submissions, we see that there is some submissions from Turkey. However, not so many papers are accepted from this country. And that's a bit of the sad part. Maybe we just need to have more submissions, and that would evidence the increase of acceptance. But so far, we do see that the largest part comes from USA and some other regions. So it's very diversified in terms of geographical coverage. The latest data that I've got about how many papers were published with the Turkish affiliation. So overall, we've got only 3 papers, and the authors had affiliations with Çanakkale, 18 Mart University, Ege University, Izmir Khatib Chalebi University. Actually, 2 papers of these were co-authored by researchers from Çanakkale on Smart University. And as you might see, there's quite a good interest in these papers. We've got a number of downloads that is about 6,000. However, one paper specifically out of these 3 get more interest. So over 80% of all downloads relates to this one paper. Okay, this is very brief about what the JT is. Now I'm going to proceed a bit about the JT policy, which is very important to read before submission and even preferably before the research conduct. So yes, definitely what each researcher should know that we are a member of COPE, and definitely we follow follow COPE guidelines. And when we make it such a statement, it means that we embed in practice the COPE guidelines, specifically when handling malpractices related to submissions or published papers. We do use text matching software just to facilitate the detection of plagiarism or self-plagiarism, and we take different decisions if we detect plagiarism, but that depends on the length and what kind of plagiarism is in the journal. What is now a bit new in our journal that we ask to confirm researchers whether the study got an ethical approval, and if not, what was the case, why it didn't need it, or maybe there is no policy about ethical approval in the institution or country. Also, to make a very clear statement about the conflict of interest, and specifically when the research is conducted. Why it's very important? It's very important specifically when the studies are conducted using ethnography approach or auto-ethnography approach. It is very crucial to state clearly about the conflict of interest. The conflict of interest, you might find also another term, synonym, competing interest. We do understand this term in a very broad sense. So it's not only about whether the research was funded and by whom, but also it might be needed to report about employment. For example, if author intends or wants to provide multiple affiliations in their publications, definitely that might affect how it should be contributed afterwards, or let's say evaluated afterwards for the researcher himself. And if there is any issue, we might have also this case to handle. Then other financial interests, for example, if the researcher provides some consultation services in a specific area, and then he also conducts the research in the same field. So this also should be very clearly reported and provided in the submission stage. There are some non-financial interests, and these can cover very different things. For example, when the paper is submitted by a member of the editorial board, or anything from the other body related to the management relationships. So this should be very clearly reported at the submission stage to the editor-in-chief. Also, whether there is any expert witnesses that relates to a specific study that is submitted for peer review, and so on. So definitely when we look at the conflict of interest, it should be considered or reflected in a very, very broad sense, just to keep in mind that afterwards we as a journal might be notified that authors did not report a conflict of interest, which was quite evident. We do also encourage authors to share their data, and we provide some statements to facilitate what kind of data sharing the author would like to use. And definitely when we speak about giving access to raw data, we do assume that these data are prepared for opening in an appropriate way. So they should be anonymized or pseudonymized. They should not contain personal data, specifically if the research participant did not agree or did not give a consent to open with all personal data. So it should be really made for opening. And definitely all the data that is provided with the publication, can be used only for non-commercial purposes and just for academic learning about the paper. Definitely we do encourage to put open data in the repositories, and the publisher Springer provides a list of potential repositories. But again, these kind of repositories could be selected based on the researcher's choice, and it could be even different than the ones that is suggested by the publisher. What else is important to when I mention about data availability is that when we suggest statements, we definitely give quite a good variety how data could be accessed. So again, what I would suggest is to consult what kind of data availability statements are or could be provided in the journal, and specifically in the publication once it is accepted. What else we have very new in our journal is definitely, I mean, a new, not open access with itself, but I mean, just as any journals, we do give an opportunity to make the publication open access. And also it's open access, which means that does not require any transfer of copyright. So the copyright remains with the author. Another opportunity which also facilitates sharing the publication is a license to publish. So in case the paper is not open access, since late 2020, Springer Nature asks to sign LTP, which is license to publish. And this license allows authors to retain both copyright and the intellectual rights to the work. They do not need to have request permission for specific uses of their own materials, let's say for teaching or for publishing in a book or and so forth. So definitely if this publication is properly credited. What could be benefits? And definitely there is no submission or other processing fee. So if the paper is submitted, it goes on my computer desk for consideration, and then reviewers are invited. What we observed that the interest in having open access papers in our journals increases on an annual basis. So we have around 20–30% per year papers published as open access. And but the open access, there is a fee for having open access, which is a bit over 2,000 euros for publication. There's some kind of hybrid solution that the publishers offers for researchers. So one of these kind of opportunities is to have transformative agreements that allows participating institutions to combine journal subscription access along with open access publication costs. I looked at the data. Where is it? Turkey. So sadly, but Turkey has neither transformative agreements nor individual institutional agreements for open access with the publisher. As well, it is neither Springer Open member nor BMS member. But that's a bit pity, but that's the situation that we have the Turkey academia. Among open access, when I mentioned and I want to show as an evidence the value of having open access paper, here you see the top 10 full text article requests from 2022. And the list was made based on all publication years. And as you may see, 9 out of 10 papers are open access, and they get more the most requests by then. And among these papers, you might also see the one that was already mentioned by Salim, who authored it with international researchers about taxonomies. So it's also here among the most requested papers from the GAT. Then other benefit, what gets the corresponding author. So first of all, he receives a shared it link to the article. And this shared it link allows to forward the link to co-authors, also to put it on social media, but only for non-commercial and personal purposes. Also, this link could be published on other platforms and other websites. But when the person uses this, which means opens this link, that person can only read the paper, so he cannot download it, editing, and so forth. So reviewers in our journals, the ones who contribute a lot with the quality of research evaluation, so they are recognized in RCED and Publons. So they are in their profile, there is a mention that they made peer review in a specific journal and how many reviews were made. So definitely they do not disclose the papers, titles, but in general, statistics is clearly seen. So overall, the publisher also asked for feedback from the authors who submitted to our journal. And from the data of 2019, we see that about two thirds of researchers would like to come back to our journal and to submit other study for our consideration. So that's pretty all about the GAT policy, which is very important to learn not only before considering the submission, but also when conducting the research. Specifically, that relates to data availability, ethical approval, and what are GAT expectations or what future research implications could be. So here I'd like to highlight that in our journal, we do have numerous studies about students' malpractices, and we do not focus only on plagiarism. So we might have such an impression when we cross over or run over the journal papers. And definitely we invite a more diversified scientific debate on different ethical aspects. And we really are interested in having more studies related to leadership, scientist perceptions, malpractices, specifically good practices, and so on. So definitely we have some papers published about students' perception, but we would be interested, for example, in the papers related to the perceptions, not only students, but also of scientists, leadership, teachers, administration. We definitely want to have a more diversified topics in our paper, as we mentioned, the scope is about all ethical aspects. So it's not only about plagiarism, it's also about nepotism, corruption, discrimination, gender issues, or that was already mentioned by Anne, cross communication, cross-cultural communication. So these are kind of different topics are also fall within the interests of the JT. Another aspect which is really very important to mention is about the need to provide a sound methodology if the empirical study is submitted to a journal. So a sound methodology means that methods for data collection, data analysis should be very clearly indicated and described, and also an explanation provided why specific methods are relevant for this study. And also, I would suggest to provide as much detail as possible in the description of the methodological approach. So that allows the reviewers to estimate or to evaluate how the research was designed and how methods were applied and practiced by researchers. And definitely at the end, we do want to have a genuine contribution to the advancement of knowledge. And that specifically is alerting for the studies that keep going to investigate or explore plagiarism. Because we have not only our journals, but in general in publishing enterprise, there are a lot of papers about plagiarism, and it's quite difficult to bring something very unique from these studies. So that's why my suggestion is to look into other ethical issues that happen within academia and try to challenge yourself by looking in more depth on these topics. So that's pretty it. If you have any questions, feel free just to bring them here.
Thank you, Loreta. It was so useful, not only for our students, not only for early career researchers, but also for us as well. I have some contribution here, starting with ethical approval. And in Turkey, we have a platform called as Dergi Park, which is run by TÜBİTAK, which is a national body providing research grants, a governmental body. And for the last few years, Dergi Park Ulakbim is encouraging journals to ask for ethical approval at the submission procedure. Although it seems to be an improvement, when it comes to practice, indeed, researchers are facing with some issues. I mean, editors, they do not want to take risks. So they are overgeneralizing ethical approval claim for almost any research. So they are asking, some editors are asking for ethical approval for any submission. So in a way, it is providing some disadvantages to the researchers. But in terms of promoting academic integrity and attaching to ethical standards, it's a very good development for our country. The second thing, as you mentioned, Turkey, either Turkey or any university here in my country, unfortunately, we don't have any agreements for open access publications. Indeed, this becomes a very important barrier for us to disseminate our research. I mean, when it comes to making submissions to the journals, indeed, it is a real barrier for us. Suppose, for example, I'd like to publish in your journals, submit a manuscript, you accept it to be published, but I have no funding, and my institution has no agreement, or our country has no agreement with the publisher, so I cannot make it open access. What does it mean? Maybe our students or some audience from YouTube may not be familiar what we mean by open access. If you pay open access fee, it means that you are making your manuscript, your article, available freely by anyone. So you do not need any subscription. The readers will not need any subscription. They will just simply click the link from their personal computers, and then they will be able to download the article. So what does it mean? It means that you will be able to reach more people. You are going to promote your research, disseminate your research. So in terms of national policies, I mean, and institutional policies, it seems that we need to invest more to research, not only researching, but also publishing and dissemination. I believe this is fine for me. Now I'd like to specifically ask my students, either considering your presentation, I mean, publishing in a reputable journal, probably they have questions, and for end session as well, we couldn't welcome all questions there. So for the rest of the time, I'd like to encourage our students to take some responsibility to interact with you. Are you happy with it? And,
yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, Salim, if you don't mind, by the time that students will come up with a question, I would like just to give some reflection and some maybe information that could be useful on what you have said about ethical approval requests. We definitely asked a statement whether the study got or needed to get an ethical approval. And in practice, it happens so that, for example, there is no policy in this area in neither in the institution or country, but editors-in-chiefs, all of them, they are able to check whether a research mislead editor-in-chief or not, which is mean we know all kind of situations happening in each worldwide countries. So that's also very important to understand when submitting the paper, not to mislead editor-in-chief, because each time if he or she has a doubt, it can easily check. Then again, it might be so that there is no ethical procedure, let's say ethical approval procedure, but the study, or let's say the methods that are used in specific studies, they simply cannot be done or cannot be conducted without ethical approval. And that comes from very international academic integrity standards. And that paper might be rejected, not because there is a missing ethical approval because the country has no such a procedure, but simply that study cannot be conducted in any case. So that's also need to be sure what kind of methods are used in a specific study, and definitely what are the situation of ethical approval in the country institution specifically. About open access, again, yes, definitely that's costly. And as I mentioned, Turkey is not among these favorable countries that can take benefits from this. But again, it doesn't depend whether the paper is selected for open access or not, but each author has a shared link, so it can keep advertising the paper through different communication channels anyway, and to facilitate others to know what the research is about.
Thank you for the clarification, Loreta. And it's good to know that at least authors from Turkey will have the link. Otherwise, if they are not making their papers open access, they will be promoting it with their colleagues.
Can I add into that too, that whole thing around the ethics? And one of the issues you might notice with a lot of academic integrity research, that a lot of it relating to students is survey data, because it gives students the opportunity to opt in or opt out. You will find that with academic integrity research that it would be unethical to target students who, say, for example, have been had a case of contract cheating proven against them, because it could put the student in a distressing situation. So it would be unlikely that any institution around the globe would pass through ethics. You might think, oh, it'd be really good to speak to these students. However, while it would be interesting and useful to get feedback from them, it wouldn't be constructive or healthy for the students to put them in that difficult situation. So there are a number of things with academic integrity research. There are some places we just cannot go because we need to protect individuals. So that is one challenge. And then for another example, and it's in the Journal of Educational Integrity, I did a study looking at paraphrasing tools and what they did. But I used, instead of getting student data or anything, I used an article I'd already published in that journal. So we got around the copyright issue. I'd written the paper. The co-author was the co-author on the original paper, so I wasn't breaching anything that way. But because of that, I didn't need ethics approval because I was using my data to go through a public available source. So you have to be very, very careful. There are some cases where you don't require ethics approval, not many. But a lot of that comes down to, say, publicly accessible information that anybody could get, and nobody is being put at harm to do that. So I just thought that might be another perspective when you're thinking about research to look at it.
Yeah, thank you for this, Ed.
Thank you, Anne. I'm just checking for a link here that I'd like to share. I've been involved in a research study, collaborative research study with Wollongong University in Dubai, collaborating with Zinat and her team there. And before we start the study, the University of Wollongong asked me to complete ethical training. So that was something new to me, although I am experienced in ethical approval. I hadn't received such a training before. Indeed, since I am an external researcher working for this project, the University of Wollongong, they did not provide such a training to me. Instead, Zinat encouraged me to take the training by using the facilities of another university that I am sharing the link here. It is the Macquarie University in Sydney. I'm going to share it in the YouTube link as well in case it would be helpful for others. So I believe it is very important. I mean, especially for early career researchers, before they start conducting, planning their research, they need to get ethical training so that they can predict the obstacles, the issues they might be facing throughout their study, and then they can plan accordingly. This is in terms of preventive approaches. This is very important to me.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, I just put the link there as well. Okay, in the YouTube, so our audience can have the link from the YouTube as well. Okay, then shall we turn to our students? Hey guys, do you have any contribution, any questions?
May I?
Yes, please.
Hi, Loreta, and thank you for your delightful presentation. And I'm so sorry to hear that you have received a few papers from Turkey. And hopefully, with precious contributions of our Professor Razi, we will be sending our papers soon, I guess. It's quite a new topic here in Turkey, that's why. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for raising our awareness.
Thank you for the interest in the journal. I hope we will
In order to avoid death reject, first, first I am going to death reject them here, and then identify the papers that might be suitable for submitting to your journal, Loreta. Otherwise, it might bring you too much workload to deal with them all.
Yeah, thank you.
I might add a couple of comments that I'm on the editorial board for the Journal of Educational Integrity, and we did some presentations for the ENAI and ICAI conferences, giving some feedback about what journals are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of things as a reviewer that bug me or frustrate me is when a writer expects the reviewer to do the editing work for them. Be kind to your reviewers, like they are donating their time for nothing. And they want to help you publish and they want to help you get published, but they are not your editors. They shouldn't be correcting basic things. So look at the journal's requirements in terms of referencing style, presentation, whether it's UK English or American English, little things like that can make a big difference, because just like I look at a reference list on a student's piece of work, I look at a reference list on an academic piece of work, and it gives me an indication firstly as to the quality of the writing and whether someone has actually looked at the journal's requirements and met the criteria. And it's also about respect. I want to concentrate on the content to give feedback on that, rather than saying you haven't followed the journal's referencing style, your references are missing details, you haven't looked at the literature properly, because sometimes the pressure to publish will make you try and take shortcuts. And then that is putting the burden on the journal, and it's also putting the burden on the referees, and you don't want to get the reviewers offside. So the thing is, look at all those requirements and respect what the journal's asking you. And just if you've had a reject from another journal, just don't take it and throw it into another journal without checking what their requirements are, what their focus is. And it's all about academic respect.
Yeah, I fully agree with Anne, because this is what I also wanted to provide another hint to the one that that each researcher should read very carefully instructions for authors. But what I do observe when I've got a submission and I see that it was already somewhere rejected and now it's very easily forwarded to the JT. For example, we use an abstract, kind of a short paragraph, but I receive submission very structured abstract, which is not kind of structure that we use, and that's very clearly seen that it's very likely that that paper was rejected and then easily forwarded without reading carefully instructions for authors. Yeah.
Another thing to look at, I was just going to say another thing to look at, and I'm just harking back to 2 papers I reviewed recently, not for Journal of Academic Ethics or a couple of other journals. But when you are asked to provide keywords, meet the criteria for the keywords, as in the number, not too many. If it wants 6, then don't give more than 6, but also make the keywords relevant, not too broad. So if you were doing a paper on academic integrity and you put down one of the keywords as education, well, there are lots of education journals and you want your paper to be found. So make sure your keywords are relevant to the paper that you've written and are not just like a broad title like philosophy or something like that, because no one will ever find it, which means it won't get read and it won't get cited. So you're helping yourself at the same time.
Yeah, that's true. Specify your keywords.
Yeah, that's true. And I'd like to go back to our reviewer responsibilities. I mean, it would be very difficult for someone out of academia to understand why we are reviewing papers. If I'm reviewing a paper, it means that I'll be spending from 5 hours to 10 hours approximately on that paper to provide feedback to someone to make it publishable. So what is my gain? We don't have any financial gains, and so it is something difficult to understand. But when you review papers, it makes you more knowledgeable about the topic, and you can approach the issue from more critical perspective. So in a way, intellectually, it is contributing to an academic's development. But for financial gains, there are no financial gains. So my suggestion to early career researchers, reviewers are not your enemies. Reviewers are just trying to help you make your paper publishable.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other contributions? It seems that only Tutku is interested in publishing her research this semester. So all the others will skip publishing their papers. Is this how shall we read the situation?
I guess it may sound too intimidating for us to publish papers as PhD students, but it's good for us to start from somewhere, at least, because we have almost finished our lessons, like the courses that we need to take. So it's time for us to take the exam, and then we may have much more time for reading and writing, hopefully. So that's why, I guess.
When you obtain your PhD degree, it means that you are recognized as independent researchers. And if you're an independent researcher, it means that you will be publishing independently on your own. And if you are not doing this when you're a PhD student, I mean, when you can receive feedback from the other lecturers around you, then you will never become an independent researcher. So it is not a favor. You must be publishing. You need to take every opportunity to disseminate your work.
I was going to say another thing I speak to my PhD students, when they are looking at publishing in a journal, make sure you've read some papers from that journal that have been published. That will give you a good flavour for the writing style that is accepted. Just picking a journal and even looking at the instructions for authors will not give you the flavour or the experience of how writing looks in that particular journal. So it is good to find a couple of papers in your field, not to plagiarise, not to copy, but to understand how the language is presented, the way the words are used, how the narrative or the story or the papers are actually structured, and journals vary. So it is important. I try and make the last thing I read before I'm writing for a journal is something from that journal, because it's putting my head in that particular frame.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a good writing tip to help organise your brain to be writing in the right sort of style.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Anne. But what sometimes I observe that early career researchers are mistaken when they are invited to read these few papers of the specific journal that they're going to submit to, is that they understand that they have also to cite these papers, though they might be absolutely relevant to their studies. So again, be careful, because that's also is observed by reviewers. So you're not obliged to cite papers from specific journal, because you can come up with a very specific topic, very niche research that is relevant for that journal. So just be careful not to oversighting irrelevant papers.
Oh, Loreta, this is a very good point. When I submitted a manuscript to a social science citation index journal almost 10 years ago, I was asked to cite at least 3 papers from that specific journal by the editor. And my paper was rejected and I was asked to resubmit. So at that time, when Clarivate was publishing the rankings, they were taking this into consideration. So it could be considered another type of academic misconduct. But contributing to Anne, it is quite important to read papers from that relevant journal. Indeed, if you check your reference list and when you identify a common name as a journal, probably it is the best option for you to submit your paper. Suppose, for example, in your paper, you are citing papers from Journal of Academic Ethics, 5 papers from this journal. It means that indeed your methodology, your discussion are quite based on the other papers that were already published in another journal. So it will be giving you some clue, and reading these papers very carefully will help you understand the author tones. For example, some journals still ask the authors to avoid personal pronouns, whereas some others are recently asking the authors to include them in their papers. If you are using, for example, personal pronouns and submitting it to a journal where it is not welcomed, then it means that you are losing it from the very beginning. So these are very minor details, but these are very important strategies to avoid desk reject.
Yeah, that's true.
Anything else?
I don't know if in a previous week that the site retraction watch has been mentioned, as if you want to see things that have gone wrong with researchers and unethical approaches and plagiarism in the academic community. The site retraction watch is very insightful as to some of the dangers, or it will tell you if you think you might take a shortcut, this site will tell you someone will find out. And that is where people have falsified data, misrepresented data, taken a diagram from someone else's study and used it as their own, have tried to write papers using paraphrasing tools or things. So it's an interesting read. I keep it on an alert that comes through. But if you're wanting to see what not to do, that is a good site to actually go to.
Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. In order to make it more comprehensible, indeed, And I use the graphics relating to COVID-19 papers. I mean, last year, I noted that there were around 40 papers retracted relating to COVID-19. However, this year it increased to 200s. So it is a good evidence of what we need to pay attention. And recently we see some scandals. Of course, I do not want to relate it with any location, but the two recent scandals both are relating to China and two spatial issues with well-known publishers. They all the complete spatial issues were retracted. So it is quite important to know what we mean here by ethical standards.
Yeah.
Okay, it is more than 2 hours we have been here together, and it was lovely to meet you here. Let's ask for once again before we say goodbye. Any further comments, any further contributions, questions from all our audience, either from Zoom or from YouTube?
No comments from YouTube.
No? Oh, okay, Anne and Loreta, I'd like to get your final comments, please.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to people and for it to be on YouTube as well. It's one of the things I love about the academic integrity community is that we share and support each other in an appropriate way to actually help inform people about how important this particular issue is. And I think it's one of the nicest research communities to be part of, because everyone is genuinely interested in educating people, helping people learn and embrace the love of learning, the love of knowledge, and encouraging original thought. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to everyone and encourage you to embrace learning and the love of knowledge, because it is such a privilege that I get very upset when people cheat because they're denying themselves an opportunity to grow.
Thank you, Anne. You contributed a lot to today's session as well. And after COVID, we welcomed you here. So it should be quite difficult for you to maintain talking to us throughout the session. So special thanks once again. Dear Loreta?
Yeah, what I would like actually to encourage your students to get out of the box when designing their research. Try to combine different theories in one. That's what would make your research innovative and quite exceptional, and be competitive and attract audience readership. So this is what I really would encourage for you to look at when conducting the research. And definitely I'm looking forward to get more submissions from Turkey.
Hopefully. Thank you for your encouragement. We'll be promoting the journal, and hopefully we will be increasing submissions from Turkey so that we can have more chances, greater chances to publish in your reputable journal.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you once again for being here, for joining us with this session today. This is the closing session for Academic Integrity Policies PhD course for this semester. Hopefully, if any other students would be interested in this course next year, we'll be having it once again. So I'd like to say goodbye to you all. Hope to see you in person somewhere soon. Take good care, please.